Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominick and Bryan.
This is such an important episode, probably one of the most important episodes that Bryan and I will ever do, and it is so fundamental and foundational to the work that we do here at the Man Amongst Men podcast. Drift is a key concept. We're going to spend the entire hour talking about it because it is so important. Drift is the enemy to living an intentional life. And we're going to go so deep on that by the end of this, you will understand where drift shows up in your life, how corrosive it can be. I do a lot of keynote speaking for Fortune 500 companies internationally, here domestically as well. And I start off every single one of my presentations with the conversation around drift and where it shows up in your life. I wrote about it as the fundamental problem in my book, Design Your Future, as the thing that keeps people stuck and living into a future of more of the same. And so today is not the last conversation, but the first of many, and a deep dive into this pervasive problem that most people don't even know that they have, which is living a life of drift. Bryan, big conversation today, man. We're talking about drift, the number one enemy to living an intentional life. You know this concept well because you read my book, Design Your Future, and the key problem there is drift and how to break free from it, how to create a future you can't wait to live into. We went to the men's retreat that we did last year where we spent the entire first day on where are you drifting in your life. And what I think the best place to start is to define what the hell is drifting. I picked up that concept from a mentor of mine. He doesn't know that he's a mentor of mine because he's been dead for decades. And it's a gentleman by the name of Napoleon Hill. And Napoleon Hill wrote the book, Think and Grow Rich. Most people know him for that book. And Think and Grow Rich should be his claim to fame because there are only 15 books that have ever sold over 50 million copies ever that are non-religious texts, right? Most of those are fiction books like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, Lord of the Flies, Lord of the Rings.
Both great books though.
Aren't they?
Yes.
I was more of a Flies guy, right? The Conch,
yes.
That guy. And the only book that was a business book or a personal development book that's ever made it into that echelon is Think and Grow Rich. Well deserved. The reason why it was so popular is because Napoleon Hill had a mentor by the name of Andrew Carnegie of Carnegie Steel. And Andrew Carnegie gave him a brilliant piece of advice and said, Napoleon, if you want to learn how the rich attract riches into their life, you need to interview 500 of the world's most successful people. And it's almost kind of like the model that most podcasters follow today, like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan and everything. It's like, just interview the smartest people.
I was going to say, Tribe of Mentors, right? The Tim Ferriss book. I feel like that's what he does very well.
Perfect.
Same methodology. I love it.
Same methodology. And he did this like 80 years ago, right? He figured this out way before our time. So Napoleon Hill did his great work during the Great Depression era. Anyway, he went out and interviewed all of those titans of industry. He mined their secrets and wrote the Bible for how to attract riches into your life, Think and Grow Rich. And so I already just talked about the commercial success of it. But what I found to be far more interesting was the secondary piece of advice that Carnegie gave to Napoleon Hill. And it was this. He said, Napoleon, if you really want to understand the human experience, then go out and interview 10 times as many people who at the end of their lives felt like they'd left chips on the table. Like they'd had regrets that they did not live a life of intentionality and purpose. Talk to them and see what they have to say.
Definitely one of my biggest fears is I'll be on my deathbed feeling I didn't do what I was supposed to do here on earth.
Yeah.
Or I left chips on the table. I could have done more.
Oh man, you just made me think of a quote. I know I'm going to butcher this, but it was something like, the definition of hell is, on the day that you die, you meet the man who you could have become. And you and I have talked about this before. It's not like in the day in, day out grind of our lives that we actually really fully hold our deathbed moment in our consciousness. It's just not like a part of our daily living, right? Like we're so busy doing things. But you and I have both had that experience late at night where you're trying to go to sleep. Maybe it's like a Sunday night, you got work the next day, And all of a sudden that fear just kind of comes up out of nowhere. And it's like, what the fuck am I doing with my life?
What am I doing here?
Yeah. What's this all about? Like, what's this all for? And it comes racing up out of nowhere. Like, you can't pinpoint like what triggered it.
My next thought is, I love my family and I've got a good job and that's all good. But what am I doing here?
It's like, I got all these things that I'm supposed to have, and why does it matter? And it comes up so quickly with such ferocity. For me, it only came up like, I would say maybe every few years. For some people, maybe it comes up a little bit more often. But like what I would always do is masturbate it away. Like, it's like, okay, it's time to go to bed. Like, I'm going to masturbate. And then I'd forget about it. And then the next day I would double down on my busyness, double down on like doing more stuff so I could distract myself from feeling that feeling.
Yeah, anything to get rid of that thought. And if I'm being honest, I don't consciously get rid of that thought. Yes. I just do other things so that I can get rid of that thought goes away.
100%. Like, that's exactly how I operated when I look back on it. And so that deathbed moment is something that we fear, but it's not present in our everyday lives. But Napoleon Hill had a chance to actually go and talk to the people who had no more time left.
Well, Dom, and it's scary. I'm 38 years old.
Yeah.
You're 39 years old?
For a few more weeks.
For a few more weeks. That's right. Big 40. I'd say we're fairly young guys. And so even thinking about death, even going into that mindset is a scary place to be.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll talk about this later, but one of the breakthroughs for me at your retreat, or even part of your book, was we did two things. We wrote our own eulogies.
Oh, right. Yep.
At some point in the future. Yep. So I was forced into thinking about, what do I want said at my funeral? And then we did a meditation, a visualization, I should say, of what it would look like. Who's there? What do they say about you?
Yeah, death meditation, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so both of those puts a whole new perspective on why we're here and what we want to leave. So I'm curious to hear what Napoleon Hill. Yeah. Napoleon Hill, not Dynamite, right?
Napoleon Dynamite, genius in his own regard.
Yes, different genius.
But a different kind of genius.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. No, actually, I'm glad you brought those things up. I think those are great takeaways for people to do at the end of this podcast once you really get an understanding of what drift is. So Napoleon Hill, so he didn't interview 10 times as many people. He interviewed 25,000 men and women who at the end of their lives felt they'd left chips on the table. He did this over like a 20 or 30 year period before, during, and after the Great Depression era. So it was like a really interesting period of time in human existence. He mined their stories and then wrote the book Outwitting the Devil, which was basically a bookend, a cautionary tale to Think and Grow Rich. And Outwitting the Devil, he has this conversation with the devil. So it reads kind of like a back and forth between he and the devil. Like he's asking all these inquiries. It's beautifully written. It's highly engaging. And the point of the book is to teach you what happens if you've lived a life where you're just on autopilot. Like you're not living a life of intentionality. It's a cautionary tale. And the book is deemed so controversial. His family deemed the book to be so controversial because he takes shots at pretty big established institutions like education systems and religious institutions. And his family buried the book for, I think, 80 years, so 8 decades. And they only released it in like 2010 or 2011. I bought the book on the recommendation of a mentor of mine, and it sat collecting dust on my nightstand next to my bed for 6 months until Hurricane Sandy hit New York City. My experience of Hurricane Sandy was my power went out, electricity for 5 days, no Wi-Fi, no running water, nothing.
The dark ages.
Right back to the dark age. No cell service.
Oh my goodness.
How did we, like, it's almost impossible.
You were forced into that little fleeting moment you have before you go to bed. And now you're almost forced into that for a extended period of time.
Pretty much. Yeah. Right. The panic mode is like, what am I doing here? All I had in that moment was a flashlight in that book. And so when I read this passage that I'm about to read to you, there was no other distraction. Like I was just a wide open sponge for these words to enter, and they forever changed the course of my life. And so I read them to you, hoping that they'll infect you the same way they did me. So this is the devil speaking. My greatest weapon over human beings is how I gain control of their minds. Habit through which I silently enter the minds of people. And by operating through this principle, I establish the habit of drifting. And when a person begins to drift, he is headed straight towards the gates of hell. And that's the devil speaking, right? And I just saw like Brian's eyes just popped like, holy shit, like headed straight towards the gates of hell.
That's intense.
Quite intense.
I didn't know my habits were going to get me to the gates of hell. So
I know that
I hope you have more information for us here.
I can't speak for everyone else's habits. I can speak for your habits, Bryan. And what he's saying here is that like we think that we're making conscious decisions on a daily basis, but in actuality, it's really we're just running on autopilot. Our habits, our patterns, our unconscious belief systems that we've accumulated over the course of a lifetime are really what's creating our daily living. Neuroscience has shown that 95% of our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors fall below our conscious detection. That's an astounding number, right? Like 95% of what you think, what you feel, what you do is falling below your conscious detection.
And I feel like I'm in more control than 5% of my thoughts. I feel like that.
Yes. We all feel like we're in much more control than the 5%. But if you think about what's in that operating system of yours, and why it is that way, you'll start to understand, holy shit, like how much of my unconscious system is running my behavior. So your brain is representative of 2% of your body mass. So physically speaking, it's not that big, but it requires 20 to 25% of your body's energy and electricity. And therefore, it's taxing your system. It needs to develop shortcuts. It needs to develop more efficient systems so that you can get through your daily life. Imagine if you had to wake up every morning and figure out where you are. If you had to figure out like how to tie your shoelaces, if every time you got behind the wheel of the car, you had to reacclimate how to turn on the ignition and right turn signal, you would be exhausted before you even made it to like 8 a.m., right? So there's a very, very important function that your unconscious system plays. And this also wraps in like all of your belief systems from childhood, what you learned about men, what you learned about women, what you learned about being a hard worker, what it means to be polite or a caring person or to be direct. All of this stuff is influencing every moment, every decision that you make. Now, the 5% that you're conscious of is extremely powerful because this is where you get a choice to make conscious decisions. This is where willpower and discipline reside. That depletes very quickly, right? At the end of the day, when you're tired, like your habits and patterns and default systems kick in. But it's the 5% that allows you to make these conscious decisions. Now, in the concept of what the devil is talking about, though, we are operating in this hypnotic rhythm, right? We think we're making conscious decisions every day. We think we're the ones behind the steering wheel of our car, when in actuality, we're most often in the passenger seat. And it's our unconscious that's driving the car.
I feel like I love that it's outwitting the devil because to me, it feels like that's not a thing. I feel like I'm actually in more control, like I stated before. But what I'm hearing here is maybe less so.
Yeah. And like none of us wants to, I don't want to believe that either, but that's what the devil says. He's like, I'm wily. I'm cunning like that. Like the greatest trick I've ever pulled off is making people believe that I don't exist, right? That is one of the things that we have to remain humble around. Ultimately, we just navigate through life in this hypnotic rhythm where we think we're making decisions, and it's only when an outside force thrusts itself upon us do we break free from drift. And that outside force is usually something pretty crappy, like the loss of a loved one, or like in your case, Bryan, being diagnosed with testicular cancer and chlamydia in the same.
These are the things in life that make us think.
Yes.
That make us take a step back and like, wait a second, like, what is the answer to why I'm here?
Bingo. It forces you to confront some of those deeper, more existential questions, calls into question like the way that you've been living your life, fundamentally speaking. And I would be willing to bet that you would say, actually, no, I don't need to bet. Like, I know that you said this, like that moment in time was one of the most pivotal moments in your life, like one of the most important events in your life.
And the question I started asking myself, because it took me 3 months from the time I felt symptoms in my testicle to when I got tested, the question that kept on coming up for me is like, why did it take me so long from symptom to getting tested? What was I afraid of? And that unraveled a whole slew of beliefs and behaviors that I didn't even know I was behaving like that.
Totally. That is an example of drifting. Like there were some fears behind there that were causing you not to confront it, even when you knew you had this like growing golf ball / grapefruit size thing happening.
Yeah, for a hot second, I thought maybe my testicle was getting bigger and that was a good thing. But the pain told me otherwise.
Yeah, right. But you told yourself another story to keep to not do anything about it for a while. We all do that, right? We rationalize things away. That is an example of drifting. Rationalization is a key tenet of drifting. And so those moments can become these transformational points in our lives. I would be willing to bet that anyone who's listening to this podcast has had a shitty experience that now when you look back on, you're like, that thing made me the man or the woman that I am today. And I thank my lucky stars that happened to me. That may be true. But the question that I would pose you is, if the only catalyst for change in your life is a crappy outside force thrusting itself upon you, how in command of your life are you really? How in control are you of the future that you're creating for yourself when you're constantly just waiting for some outside force of some shitty kind to thrust itself upon you?
I wouldn't wish cancer on anybody else just so that they can have a wake-up call.
Right.
So that's the question I have is how do we not get cancer and still get a wake-up call? How do we not get fired but still get a wake-up call? How do we stay in love with our lovers without cheating on them?
Yeah. That's
or
actually,
getting caught.
What you just said is a big point about I wouldn't wish cancer upon anyone. Of course you would. You wouldn't wish shitty things on anyone, except those seem to be the only things that really, or primarily the big things that change people's lives. I was just at a retreat this past weekend with my mother at Canyon Ranch in Massachusetts. It's a great facility for hiking and you can get therapy done and meditation, yoga specialists. It's a beautiful place. Typically older people go, just as a disclaimer. And I took my mom there. She felt right at home. But there was a woman that was there who was the chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 company. And she had gone there because she just had a stroke, because entirely due to work-related stress. It was 2 weeks earlier she had this stroke. So she was still in the recovery process. Fortunately, she didn't have any paralysis or any major lingering issues. And so we laughed about the efficiency of her stroke as a wake-up call. And she's like, I'm grateful in the sense that it really caused me to finally address my health, my work-life balance. And I said to her, you're lucky that you got this wake-up call in a way where there's not any lingering effects. Because most people, when they get hit by the Mack truck, there's something that stays with them for a long period. You were lucky in the sense of testicular cancer is highly curable, chlamydia.
And I have two balls. I had some redundancy there. So yes, now I only have one ball.
Yes.
So I did lose something permanently,
yes.
But there was some redundancy.
And now there's all sorts of fun jokes you can make about it. Even your Instagram handle, Talking Nut, is a representation of that.
I totally feel what you're saying. We don't come out of these things unscathed.
That's right.
Right? These things that they're forced upon us. And I wonder, that woman who's the chief marketing officer, I wonder if she had woke herself up to why she's living here, if she would have even had the stroke. So life has a funny way of bringing us disasters to wake us the hell up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the entire point of this conversation is, can you wake yourself up before the Mack truck hits you? And the reason why I keep using this Mack truck example is because I was doing a podcast with Stephen Spencer on the Optimized Geek podcast. And he said, wake up calls come in three forms. It's the feather, the 2x4, and the Mack truck, right? The feather is kind of like that gentle thing that most of us pay no attention to, and we step over it completely. Other times we'll get hit in the head with a 2x4 and still we don't wake up. And it's usually when the Mack truck hits, like the stroke or testicular cancer, chlamydia, whatever it is, that we finally wake up and pay attention. My desire is that you can call the shots on that. You don't even need to wait for the feather. You can say, hey, I'm out of balance here. Something's going on, and you can create that shift yourself.
And Dominic, in the sexual health realm, quite frankly, what got us both talking about this is, yes, for me, it was testicular cancer and chlamydia. And what I'm trying to get people to understand is that you don't have to have that. You can ask these empowered type of questions around, have you been tested recently? Or what are you like in bed? Right? As opposed to some disaster happening down the road. So I totally feel you on this.
Yeah, because chlamydia could have been something worse.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's exactly what you're saying is you don't have to wait until that happens. So the point here is we don't want you to wait for crappy things to happen to be the only catalyst for change, because you can actually spend your entire life trying to avoid those things. Those things then happen. And then maybe, you become a better human being because of it. But your whole life is kind of oriented around avoidance and reacting versus consciously putting a stake in the ground and saying I want to climb that mountain because I decided to.
Dude, this so resonates with me right now.
Yeah.
The avoid and react.
Yeah.
I feel like I was in that loop for a long time, and in some cases still am.
Okay. Is there a specific area that you're starting to feel that way about, or just generally you get that sense?
I think when I was working in corporate America before, there was a lot of, let me just see what somebody wants and then do it. Let me wait for that email to come in and then react.
Oh my God.
As opposed to now that I'm running my own business, it's what am I going after and what needs to get done for that? Because I really enjoy it. I want that sort of outcome. Those two areas for me are very, very different. And I never framed it before as avoid and react versus be, what's the other word? Proactive or?
Yeah. I mean, proactive would be part of it, but it's almost like intentional.
Intentional. Right? Great. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like, I remember your word for 2017 was intentionality. Like you lived that entire year as the umbrella word. Everything I'm doing, my relationships, my work, is that intentional. What you had just said about the difference between like my 15 years in corporate and then the past 3 years as an entrepreneur is spot on. It's like, I almost felt like I was trained to wait for my bosses to release the new annual performance objective or the new sales goal and then react to that versus like in this arena, now I got to create the market. I got to create the podcast topics. I have to create the keynote presentation in the next book. It's constantly being proactive and using my creative energy. And it can be tiring, right? Because it requires your best energy. You cannot show up as a C+. And I think that's one of the things that prevents people from breaking free from drift is that there's like kind of a wind at your sails, but the wind is provided by the devil. Like he's navigating you where he wants to take you, not where you want to go.
Yeah, this is bringing up a lot for me. You know this, but for about 8 years, I did consulting work at the FBI.
Yeah.
And something that's very unique about their culture is all the managers, all the leaders there, they have a TV in their office. And the TV is constantly on the news. Mm-hmm. The reason is because the FBI largely is a reactive organization. Something happens and then they go investigate it. But that constant TV stream, it's a fear-based thing. You're just waiting for something bad to happen.
And it's reinforcing reactivity.
Right. And it was a huge shift. If we think back to 9/11, it was a huge shift to how do we start preventing things like terrorism versus reacting to things like murders?
Right.
And that's a completely different feel.
Totally different shift.
You don't need to watch the news in order to prevent terrorism. It's a totally different shift.
Totally different shift. And you think about how medicine has been treated historically. Like medicine has been wait till something manifests itself and then we'll fix it at the end versus preventative medicine today, which primarily should be the way that you diet and the way that you work out and the way that you sleep is a big deal. And even going back to the Japanese manufacturing system for cars, when Japan first came in to become a car manufacturer, they were a laughingstock of the world until Edwards Deming went over and introduced them to a new process of manufacturing cars. The way that they optimized their quality control was they didn't wait till the car was off the assembly line to check its defects. They checked the defects at like the beginning, the middle, and end stages. There were like 20 touch points or something like that. So by the time they had implemented the proactive measures, one American car had more defects on it than an entire fleet of Japanese cars.
Big difference.
Big difference from reacting to what's broken at the end versus proactively putting measures in place. But this all falls under the category of being intentional and creating proper habits. And this quote that I love the most, and I use this all the time in all my keynote presentations. I put it in my first book. I'll probably put it in my second book. Is this quote by a man named F.M. Alexander, who is a Australian acting coach who taught people how to like change their behaviors and embody micro movements and motions. And he said, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, which decide their futures. Right? Like you don't decide your future, your habits decide your future because your habits are really in that 95% that's kind
what
of
I'm doing most of the time, even if I don't realize it.
Bingo. But the thing that I like to point out is that most people have not consciously designed their habits. Their habits have happened to them. You and I talk about this all the time, like porn habits for men, right? Men do not consciously, like you just basically saw porn and then you're off to the races. Like, do you know why or what triggers you? When it comes to waking up in the morning, do you have a morning routine? Like, is that intentional? That sets you up for 17 hours of success in those waking hours that follow? Or do you just get up the way that most people do, which is dive right into your cell phone?
Yeah. And to go back to the example of living and working in corporate versus doing the entrepreneurship thing is in corporate, I woke up just early enough to hop in the shower and make my first meeting.
By the skin of your teeth.
By the skin of my teeth. That was it. That's all that mattered.
Yeah.
Right. Where now I wake up and I'm pumped to do my routine, to get my coffee, to sit there and meditate, maybe take a little journal, whatever that is. And that has become just over the past year and a half, Dom, so routine for me that it's automatic.
Yes.
I had to intentionally like create that. I knew it would help me, But over time, now I love it. And there's a love and a joy in it every single morning.
Totally. What you just hit on is something really important. So 95% of what you think, feel, and do is unconscious. 5% is conscious. When you were designing this new morning routine to support your daily existence, you had to rely a lot upon that 5%, the conscious thinking, right? That's where your willpower and your discipline resides. Now, willpower and discipline are overrated because it's depleted quickly. You can see evidence of this. Like at the end of your day, when you're sitting on your couch after going through a very full day, your discipline is at its lowest. This is where like you eat the worst foods, you have sugar, you have too many glasses of wine, you have too many Netflix episodes. Why? Because your willpower and discipline is shot and you're just going to default to what's comfortable and easy or what you feel good in that moment. So where real power comes from is designing a ritual that turns into a habit. Like you said, now your morning routine is habitualized, so it doesn't require a conscious energy output. It's actually easier for you to do the routine because you've made it habit.
I'll take that even one step further. Because I love it, because I love this routine, it's sacred to me.
Yes.
And I won't let other elements interrupt it.
Bingo.
From waking up in the morning just to make the meeting is a very, very different feeling.
100% different feeling. Like, so you are in command of your life. You're the one who's calling the shots on like what gets to come in or not into that morning routine. So like you're in command. You're not drifting. Whereas before it was like a fear of, oh, the thing that got me out of bed in the morning was being late for the meeting.
Completely. Yes.
Like reactive. So what you just hit upon, Bryan, is like the key to living an intentional life is designing these rituals that require willpower and discipline upfront, like maybe a healthy workout schedule, maybe a meditation practice, maybe time alone with, if you're a married couple with kids and you're crazy busy all the time, scheduling like once every 2 weeks, a date just for the two of you. Like that upfront requires an extraordinary amount of work and conscious energy. So it can be tiring, but when you do it enough and it becomes habit, that's where real power starts to kick in.
I've asked myself this question probably the last 2 to 3 years and almost daily. There are other people I see out there. I'm like, how does that woman or how does that guy do all that?
Yes.
How do they run 3 companies, have 2 books, are constantly on social media? Like, how in the hell do they do that?
Yeah. Habits, proper habits. And that's the thing. People come to me and they say, Dominick, like you must be so disciplined in your workout and the way you eat or whatever, how you get these things done. And I'm like, yes, but it's really like I've been very intentional around aligning the most important things in my life. And it's because I create these boundaries, because I have these patterns in the way that I get up and the way I go to bed. That's what allows me to do all those things in between. And it's very energy efficient. So I think it'd be really helpful to give people some places to look at in their own lives about where you may be drifting. And these are 5 questions that I pulled from Outwitting the Devil. And I use these for me. I've used them for us in our men's retreat. I ask these all the time in corporate work that I do. And as you're listening to these, it can create, and I want to do a disclaimer here, it can create some dark moments for you because as you start to realize the contexts in your life where you may be drifting, you may be very intentional in like the workplace, but drifting in your relationship or vice versa. It could create some dark moments to say, oh my God, I've been absent at the wheel for years. Don't beat yourself up. We're going to give you some techniques to take away so that you can break free from drift and recognize that like we're all drifting. Every one of us are drifting in some area and we could always do better. Fair enough?
Fair enough. It's a journey, not an end.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So question number 1, do your fears drive your behavior? Do your fears drive your behavior? And if the answer is yes, then you're drifting. Now, okay, let's get a little bit more specific around this. I work with a lot of high performers that run their own businesses or that lead large businesses, Fortune 500 companies, where they say, no, fears don't drive my behavior. I run to that which I'm afraid of. I like slaying the dragon, climbing the tallest mountain. Give me a challenge, I'll tackle it. And I think that's one form of confronting a fear. But when I've had the opportunity to pull back the layers of the onion of what really is motivating many of those people is this deep-rooted fear that they're not good enough. A deep-rooted fear of being passed by someone else. A deep-rooted fear of not being special or seen as being special. Deep-rooted fear of not having the kind of money that would be considered successful or the title that would be considered successful. Like those are the things that actually are what motivates someone working 80, 90, 100 hours a week. Not always, but often. And the example from like my early childhood that helped me to actually really connect with this concept was not a hockey guy, but I love the story of the 1980 Miracle US hockey team. And if you don't know the story, the United States had pulled their Olympic team together by a bunch of like, I don't know, college amateur kids. And at that point in time, Russia was the team to beat in the world. I mean, like they'd won 5 straight Olympic gold medals. Their team beat like the NHL All-Stars, right? So like their Olympic team beat the NHL All-Stars. They were a machine. And the US played them in an exhibition match leading up to the Olympics. They got wiped out like 13-1. But then in the semifinals of the Olympics, the US pulled off what's considered to be like probably the greatest upset in Olympic history. And they beat the Russians. I don't know. It was like 3-2 or
close to sports history. I mean, that big of an event, right?
I mean, it was like, it may be the number one of all time biggest upsets, especially if you're an American, right? Like it's considered to be that. And I remember watching the 30 for 30 on ESPN about this. And they interviewed a couple of Russians who were on that team. And the Russians were standing on midline and they were looking at the jubilation that the Americans were experiencing when they won. And it was so foreign to them, that feeling of excitement and joy, because the entire way that they'd been raised was fear of losing, that you would be a national disgrace if you brought home anything other than a gold medal. And if you do bring home a gold medal, it's not really a congratulations. It's kind of like you were expected to. So their whole system was built on an operation of fear, and they couldn't even relate to what they were seeing in terms of the success on the other side of the line.
Fear. And the word that keeps coming up to me as you're talking about it is like the chase. Like the chase to win the gold medal, the chase to get the promotion, the chase. For what reason?
For what reason?
Right.
Yeah. And the journey is sacrificed in that process. You cannot enjoy the journey because all you're doing is constantly going towards the end. Now, anyone who tells you that it's all about the journey is only half right. Meaning like the destination matters, going for gold or going for a big accomplishment or success matters because you would never go on the journey in the first place if you didn't have some sort of North Star that you wanted to go on. So there's a relationship between the two, but most of us are so fixated with the outcome that we don't enjoy the journey.
The gold medal one resonates because it's like, why am I doing this? And is the answer to get the gold medal? Sure, on the surface. Like, what does that gold medal mean to you? For the Russians, it sounded like it meant that maybe they'll be celebrated, but also it was expected.
Yeah.
And they won't be looked down upon if they win it.
That's right.
But that feels very different than I imagine what was the joyous American celebration afterwards.
Totally.
Because it meant way more than just the gold medal.
That's right. Yes. And you could see the way that they were celebrating was like a 5-year-old child would celebrate. And you don't get a chance to see that like with adults very often. So when your fears are driving your behaviors, one of the things that I see, especially with people who have been in their working life for, let's say, 2, 3, or 4 decades into their working career, is that when they experience an accomplishment, right? Like maybe hitting a new sales goal or getting a big project done at work or being promoted, I categorize those as wins. Those successes are fleeting in the amount of like joy they provide. It's just kind of like, yeah, you enjoy it for a moment and then you go right back to like all the other grind of your life. The losses, like when you lose a client or like maybe you get divorced or something big, that becomes something that's lingering and like you get stuck there. The worst place of all, when you really know your fears are driving your behavior, is when you feel numb to almost anything. Like when something really good happens or when something really bad happens, it's just kind of like meh. There's like a lack of energy there.
No real highs, no real lows.
Yeah.
Just I'm doing.
Perpetual like apathy. It's typically because fears are driving your behavior, and that defense mechanism of not feeling is what comes in because the pain of the fear is so intense that you wrap on unconsciously this blanket of apathy to not feel it whatsoever. The problem is it also kind of wraps up your joy as well.
It's like a defense mechanism, what it sounds like.
Totally. Yeah. You're not aware that you're doing it. It just happens. That's when I start to see people who have like, no life left in their eyes. The people I'm talking about, right? Or to motivate to do anything, it seems so hard. And we've all been in periods of times of our life where it feels that way. But some people get stuck in that place, man, and they don't ever come out of it.
This happened to me towards the end of my corporate time period. I called it a lack of energy. And that was one of the first things that broke me out of this mentality is I started writing a list down of what are the things that give me energy? What are the things that take away my energy?
Right.
And I was shocked what was on that list.
What was on that list, Bryan?
Oh my gosh. One thing that gave me energy was drinking more water. Okay. I noticed that pattern. Things that took away my energy, TV, video games, some things I'm embarrassed to even say on this podcast.
Chronic masturbation.
There's definitely a piece of that. And there was other things too, not bringing up subjects or avoiding certain things. For me though, the big shift was energy. And when I hear what you're talking about, I get this element of lifelessness.
Yes.
So often if I see somebody on the street, like what's the difference between them and somebody else that's working? That's the physical manifestation of it. But I've felt even in the corporate setting where it's just drifting.
It is.
Yeah.
Like that lifelessness that you're talking about. Like I see with people who have lived too long in a place of trying to be safe, trying to live a life of predictability or to control or to, you know what I mean? And
not get hurt.
Not get hurt. That's exactly right. And so that's fear-driven behavior. The second question you can ask yourself if you're drifting or not is, do you lack enthusiasm and initiative to begin anything you are not forced to undertake? So do you lack enthusiasm and initiative to begin anything you are not forced to undertake? Meaning, are you able to say, I want to do this, and then go and do it even if no one else is holding you accountable, right? So it's like, I want to write a book. And even though no one else is holding me accountable to write a book, no publisher's putting me on a deadline, can you go and write it? I want to go and take a vacation and not have my work interfere with that. I'm going to shut it down and can you do that even if there's like no one else that you're responsible to but yourself? Most people only energize around someone's giving you an assignment, someone's giving you a project, or you have customers that are banging down your door and you have to respond to them. It's this constant place of reactivity. There's only when like a consequence is hanging over your head, do you energize? And that's drifting because again, it goes back to that like reactivity state versus like being the one who puts the stake in the ground and saying, no, this is how I'm going to go and do it.
The question that comes up in my mind, and I've again asked myself this question a lot, is what do I actually want?
Yeah, right.
It's almost easier. You can be lazier. It takes less energy to just go with the flow. And that flow is going to be dictated by somebody else. When I start stating, what do I want? And this, by the way, this could be an accomplishment like a job promotion or writing a book. This can also be just entertainment.
Yeah.
This is the idea of, do I want to get invited to a party and just see what happens? Or do I want to go do what I want to do? I want to go see a play. I want to go hike some mountains. I want to go on a vacation. And it sounds silly in that regard, but if we can't state what we want, it's hard to go after it. But life will fill in the gaps.
Yes.
Right. With drift.
Well, what you're talking about here is many people are living joyless existences because they don't define, like what you were saying, is like what brings them joy in their life and then create activities, create rituals and habits around that joy. Joy is not something that someone else is going to assign to you. Like you have to go out and get it. And that's why it's interesting. Like when I ask people who are in their 50s or, 40s or 50s, it's like, do you have something on your horizon? That's like a kid at Christmas type of excitement, or kid at Hanukkah, or kid at birthday, whatever it is, on your horizon where you get that excited. And most people say, no, I've got nothing on my horizon.
Maybe a vacation.
Right. And a vacation for them in many cases is predictable. It's just kind of like I'm going to go lay on the beach, have some Mai Tais, which is awesome. And it's also not inspiring. It's not invigorating.
Do you really want that or not? Right. Or is that what a vacation is supposed to be?
That's right. Yeah. Like you don't know. And you can trace this back to like childhood. You had to ask for your parents for permission, and schooling system was permission. All this stuff was handed down and there were consequences for not following that. So you've conditioned yourself over the course of a life to following orders and instructions and to avoid being punished when you go outside the lines. It requires an entirely different skill set and muscle memory to chart your own course.
This brings me back, Dominick, as you're talking about this, to the beginning of our podcast when we talked about Napoleon Hill interviewing people on their deathbed.
Yes. And
it's almost like what those people are probably thinking of, that what they wish they would have done or what they would do if they had more time. Totally. They probably have a lot of answers. If I had more time, I would X.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And guess what? They had all the time in the world until it was too late. And so that's the question you want to start asking yourself. And by the way, like one way to kind of check in with yourself right now is 3 years ago, where were you? What were the things you said that you would do? And now today, have you done them? Or are they still the same things that you've been talking about? Are you still bitching about your job? Are you still not in the relationship that you want? Are you still with the person you don't want to be with? And could you imagine waking up 3 years from now and that same shit applies? Like if nothing is changing. And that's where you know you're deep into drift, is when things start to look and feel quite the same, even though you're running through every single day and you're like, oh my God, it's busy. Where did the time go? But like not much has really changed. That's drift. Question number 3 to ask yourself: do you begin many things, but finish very few? I see you smiling at that one.
I remember this one from your men's retreat, and this was the one that got me.
Yeah, why is that?
I loved starting things. Loved good ideas. The men's retreat was super helpful with this because there's a big difference between starting a business and really making it go.
Totally. Do you mind if I share your story about the man who stood across from you that kind of reflected this back to you?
I would love that, yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, why don't you share it?
We did this exercise where we had, I think, 20 guys in the group there, and they paired us up. And we stood only about 1.5 feet from each other. Yep. And this is the first time I'd ever done anything close or remotely like this. And it was very scary because what we had to do was stand face to face, 1.5 feet from each other. And the instruction was to look into the left eye of the guy in front of you. And doing this with another guy and searching into his soul, there's a lot of things that ran through my head. Yeah. Like one was, what is he looking at? Yeah. Am I sweating right now? Why am I nervous looking at another human being?
Yeah. And
what is he thinking?
Man, right? Like, I mean,
and with really a guy that I don't know, and I didn't know him at all.
That's right. Yeah.
We did a couple rounds of that. For 1 minute, we'd stare into the eye. For 2 minutes, we'd stare into the eye. And breathing was difficult and all the different feelings that you had in that moment. The last part of that exercise was, now tell that man something you feel about them.
And you don't even know each other at this point.
Don't even know. You hadn't had a single conversation with this guy. Yep. And I forget what I even told him, but I do remember what he told me. And that was, Bryan, I feel like I need to tell you, you're great 90% of the way. You'll take the football to the 10-yard line and you don't quite punch it through.
Right, right.
And when he said that, I was like, fuck you. Because that sounds like a guy that can't do anything. But it really hit home because I had started a lot of things. I had a lot of ideas, but I didn't follow through on most of those.
Yeah.
And when I look back at that time period in my life, I didn't follow through on a lot of it, whether that was a relationship or whether that was a business or even in sports in some cases. There's always like something else. There was always a more important thing to get distracted by.
Yes, because the new thing is exciting. But like, say, for example, I know I have how many blog posts that have gone unfinished because like I get into that perfectionist mode and I get afraid of, am I going to release something that's going to be crappy or garbage? And so I jettison it to start another blog post or to do anything else because the initial honeymoon energy of something new is so much more seductive and exciting than the dotting the I's, crossing the T's, potentially putting myself up in front of other people for judgment, criticism, or worst of all, like, no one responding to something that I've posted at all. It's just going like invisible, right? And so you see this in the business world all the time. Like how many projects get started and they don't get finished because maybe some political reason or whatnot. And there's always a distraction. In today's era, there are more distractions than ever before pulling you. And if you can be that easily taken off of your game, you're drifting. If you're really locked in on something where like you have to get it done and you will be unstoppable, then drift is not your enemy anymore.
Let me flip the script on this a little bit because something that I found after we did this men's retreat and this point that you're talking about right now hit me. I said, well, where do I usually stop? And it's where the fear kicks in. It's where, your blog post that might not get any likes. It's, well, people are going to think I'm stupid if I'm doing this. Maybe I can't accomplish this. Maybe I'm not skillful enough to do this. Yep. And those are usually the points where I'd get distracted and go do something else. But what I have found, and since that was maybe a year and a half ago, this was, I've forced myself through those moments in many areas of my life to continue that journey. And in some cases to finish that journey or come to some sort of conclusion. And what we don't often see is the value and the sweetness that comes from the accomplishing, from the finishing.
That's right.
And even if, and I've had several moments like this in my life, current one being my business, where I would not say that I have been successful yet, but I have pushed through those times that it was easy to quit.
Right on.
And just those little wins, not just the success, but pushing through those times to quit has lit me up to continue down the path. And that is so much sweeter than starting the next thing.
Totally. It's so much sweeter, and it builds confidence to say, like, I can finish anything. You know, like no one can fucking take me off my path. So like when obstacles come that you weren't expecting, it's just like, oh, this is just another game. It's just another challenge. Bring it.
Yeah. Going back to the first question we're supposed to ask ourselves, it's like, you're not worried about what's coming at me and how am I going to react to this? It's almost like, bring it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right on.
I know I can do this. I know that this is going to be a lesson. Great. Bring it on.
Yeah. Fire makes iron stronger. Cool. Next question. Do you publicly or privately criticize others? Do you publicly or privately criticize others? That's when you know you're drifting. If you are so consumed with cutting someone else down, or did you see what that other person did, then it's like, how locked in on your mission are you, where you're so like focused on someone else? And, you know, like I think about Elon Musk trying to colonize Mars and all the businesses that he's running. Like, do you think he sits around and bitches about what Jeff Bezos is doing? I would have a hard time imagining he would dedicate much energy to that when there's so much work to be done. And so ultimately, I find that people who get stuck in a state of drift are constantly comparing and criticizing and cutting other people down and not focusing on what they can do.
And Dominic, there's such a sweet wrapper, because criticizing is easy to sit back and be like, I don't criticize anybody, whether it's consciously or unconsciously or public or privately. But here's the trick that I found in my life to get around the criticism. It's not, I'm going to criticize you. It's, I'm going to help you. Like, you have a problem and I'm going to help you.
Okay.
Right. So it's almost like a nice positive spin on criticism instead of focusing on my own shit.
Oh, I see. So you would come in and help save other people.
Yeah. So I'm not focused on completing my task, my thing. So instead, I'm going to sit here with my crossed arms and be like, Dominic, tell me your problems, or let me tell you your problems even better, and let me help you fix them.
You know what, man? You've highlighted like an entire category of people that I coach or train in the corporate space who constantly complain about not having enough time for themselves because they're constantly helping other people. And here's how diabolical that can be. When you're constantly helping other people, you get praised as being a great person, as a good partner organizationally. He's a team player. She's a team player. But what you're often doing is doing that to avoid the most important shit in your life, right? The stuff that really scares you. It's like, if I'm helping someone else and I don't have time for myself, I would really love to do this. I'd really love to get healthy. I would really love to leave corporate. I would really love to go for that promotion. But like, you don't ever do it because you're constantly focused on other people. It's a really sophisticated and socially acceptable way to avoid what you really need to be doing.
Completely. If I don't know what the next chapter of the book that I'm writing is supposed to look like, well, I can go help somebody else with their business plan or things that maybe I like doing or know how to do, things that I know how to do and I know I can provide value, and that provides that little, I don't know, it's serotonin or whatever it is. It's a little bit of a payoff.
Yeah. And people love you for it.
And I hear parents say this a lot with their children.
Totally.
And I'm not a parent. I can't say that I fully understand that, but I hear often like, oh, I would do this or I would do that, but I need to take care of my kids, but everything else. So the warning I would give, or the indicator or the trigger I would look for, is where are we helping other people in parts of their lives instead of focusing on our own stuff?
Yes. As a means of avoiding your own stuff. That is huge. Yeah. That is a big area of drift. Final drift question. Do you lack a major purpose in your life? Do you lack a major purpose in your life? You know, I used to ask this question to my sales team when I was running a sales team at Prudential Retirement. It was their job annually to bring in $200 million of new investment assets every single year. They had to start from zero every single year. They were all family men and family women who had kids, and they were on the road minimum 100 nights a year away from their families. And I looked at them across the table. I'm like, why the fuck would you take this job? You know, like with that heavy stakes, with that much time away from your families, why would you take that job? And the platitudes would come out first, right? They would say, well, I'm doing this for my family to create a future, like the things that you're supposed to say. And of course, on many levels, it's true. But if I were to ask them really to go much deeper and to say, no, like to go back to where we started, existentially, like why are you here? And what role is this particular job at this particular point in your life contributing to that major purpose? And are you heading to a deathbed where you live a life of regret? Or you're on the deathbed where you're like, this was the sweetest life that anyone could have lived. And most of us have never really fleshed that out and don't have that ultimate North Star. I know that for most of my life, I certainly never did. I never went through that exercise. I didn't even know how to contemplate that, right? It's not something we get taught. And in fact, we often get taught not to think about death. It's something
right. I mean, even going through in grade school and high school, it's a good grade so you can get into college. And then when you're in college, it's just the day-to-day of getting good grades so you can get a good job.
You go base to base.
Base to base, right.
Yeah. You're never really thinking about like where it goes in the grand scheme of things. My mentor, Lee Brower, who was featured in the book The Secret, he was the one who actually recommended the book Outwitting the Devil. He was the one who said, if you don't have clarity around where you're heading in the future, how could you make meaningful decisions in the present moment? That really struck with me. It's like, wow, if I'm not clear about where I'm going, how could I ever make a meaningful decision in this present moment about where to go next? Especially when it's one of those, do I invest my time here or do I invest my time there? And there's so many of those calls on our energy and our focus. Most people have a really hard time of delineating that. So this actually kind of, I think, leads nicely into the action that people can take. And you kind of referenced this earlier on.
Before you jump into that, let me tell one quick story that is a representation of, let's just say, a point in my life where drift was prevalent, but I didn't realize it.
Let's hear it.
So I had got done with chemotherapy and I was about 9 months out from chemo. I'm living in Washington, D.C., and I'm working for Accenture at the time. My boss asked me if I want to go to happy hour and get a couple of drinks, not just with him, which would have been cool, but with his boss and his boss's boss.
Okay, so it's a big opportunity.
So there's a big opportunity. So 4 dudes, like the highest guy is like number 3 at Accenture, right? Happens to be in D.C. for something. So we go to the bar, we grab 1 beer, and we're standing at this pub table. And we got on the subject of spirit animals.
At Accenture, you're talking about spirit animals.
Well, we're at a bar now. We got 4 guys from Accenture, and we're talking about somehow it came up.
Was this like an ironic conversation, or people were actually taking this seriously?
It started off as a joke, but then the head guy goes, "Well, yeah, I have a spirit animal," and then of course we all fell into line.
Of course,
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, so do I.
So he goes,
"You go."
So first. the head guy at Accenture goes, "Yeah, my spirit animal is a bald eagle." And I'm sitting there. Now I'm 4th in line, right? I'm the most junior person there. And so I'm thinking as they're talking, like, what is my spirit animal? I haven't even thought about my spirit animal. And so the big boss at Accenture goes, I'm a bald eagle because I have great vision. I can fly, and it's a bald eagle. Yeah. I mean, America, right? We're in Washington, D.C.
America.
And so I'm like, wow, that's a really good one. I kind of wish it could have been mine, but he took that one. Totally cool. I'll get something else that's cool. Number 2 guy goes, well, I would be the king of the jungle. I would be the lion. Because he has his whole pride and team around him, and he's the king. He has no real predators. I was like, wow, you're
badass.
That's a pretty good one too, man. I'm like, okay, so the sky is gone, the jungle is gone. So the next guy goes, and he goes, yeah, I'd be a shark. I'd be a tiger shark. Because they're so healthy. They're constantly on the move. They can sense different things. They never get like a sickness like cancer, which kind of hurt me personally, but that's cool. Like I'm the shark. And I was like, God, that's a really good one too. So here I am. It's my turn to impress like 3 levels above me. And I had a moment of clarity, a moment of truth that came to me in that moment for whatever reason. And I said, well, yeah, I feel like my spirit animal is a jellyfish. And that moment I was like, why did I just say jellyfish? Wait, what? Like, no. So my boss tried to help me out and say, well, Bryan, you mean like the man of war jellyfish, like the big badass one that
stings,
kills stuff, right? I'm like, no, you know those little box jellyfish, those moon jellyfish, they're kind of cute, just kind of floating around. I was so embarrassed after I said this. I had drank only half my beer. I put it down and said, guys, I've got a lot of work to do. I need to go home. So thank you for this invite. I'll see you later, boss.
And they were happy to see you go after.
They were probably happy to see the jellyfish drift away. So on my way home, I was asking myself, why in the world did I say jellyfish? Like, what overcame me? I never even thought about jellyfish before. And it was in that moment of asking the question of like, why did I just make this idiotic comment that I realized that was my life. I had no major purpose in life. I had gotten sick, and like after that, I was like, I hope I don't get sick again.
Yeah.
I didn't find joy in things. If somebody asked me to go to happy hour, asked me to go to a club that night, I would do that, but I would never proactively plan anything.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think that moment in my life was probably the biggest drift moment when I started asking those questions of what's next. That's when everything started to shift. And one of the first inflection points in my life.
Yeah. So like the jellyfish just kind of gets washed around by the water and the waves, you just kind of go wherever. There's not a lot of friction that's there, but there's not a lot of like,
there's nothing. It's just, you're literally drifting by the current of the water. Yeah. Food comes to you. You don't go hunt it.
Yeah.
There's no real structure to the jellyfish. Even the body of it is kind of floaty.
Yeah.
And it was just an interesting insight that happened to me. Then I realized I didn't call it drift at that time. Yeah. But that upon reflection and doing this podcast, it's exactly what it was. And that's a shitty place to be.
Yeah. It could be an interesting exercise. Like if you were to ask yourself, like, what is my spirit animal? You close your eyes and what comes to you? You can easily manufacture like, I'm a shark or I'm a lion, I'm a panther, right? Like I'm a predator. But like what actually came to you, because you had this moment of honesty, was that jellyfish. And maybe you can do this exercise as you're listening to this. Like what animal comes to you and does it feel real? Like, do you feel connected to it? Like you said, yeah, it felt real, as embarrassing as it was, but it gave you like a moment of honesty that you could actually do something with. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's like, do you know why you're here doing what you're doing? Do you lack a major purpose? Because if you don't have that North Star, what I find for people is that the day in and day out grinds, the frustrations, the chaos can get really it can just wear on you. You can start to feel this like resentment, this rust that starts to decay the parts inside of you. If you don't know what this is all for, that's when people start to get like apathetic or they get cynical. So the exercise that I implemented at the men's retreat, I put this in my book, Design Your Future, that has like a guide on how to do it, is called writing your own eulogy. This is different than an obituary, right? The obituary is in the newspaper, basically just tells you the facts of how old you were, where you died, who is, left in your absence. The eulogy is the time in your life where presumably someone's going to read a lot of really beautiful things about you, but you're not going to be around to hear it. And wouldn't it be cool if you didn't need to hear it because you lived your life with such intentionality that you would know every single word that they were going to say anyway? And the way that I encourage people to write it is to first identify like, how long do you want to live, right? Not how long you think you will live. Like, cause when I started asking people, how long do you think you'll live? People got really heady. They started thinking about their own family history and sicknesses and illness. Like my father died at this age. How long do you want to live? And how long do you want to live healthy? And when you put a number down, it can be unreasonable in today's standards. Mine is 121 years of age. I fully believe that's possible with science and health and nutrition, etc. I want to live to 121 and I don't want to be on a walker peeing into a colostomy bag. Like I want to be
a healthy 120.
Totally. And I also want to know, as you're going through this exercise, what were the accomplishments that you had over the course of your life? And they don't have to be professional accomplishments. They could be, but also like your family or the adventures that you took or the people that you impacted. And if the best days of your life, if many of the best days of your life have not yet happened, what would those days be? And how would you write that into a eulogy, right? And so when you have a chance to really reflect upon the final few moments of your life here and to look back on it, like the 80, 90, 100, 120 years that you've lived, you can get really intentional around the bigger picture of your life, which then provides meaning and purpose for, the days that you're living right now.
I love that, Dominic. And writing that eulogy as part of the men's group, that was a huge moment for me to understand what really matters and also to add a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Because I looked back and I said, wow, at that time I was 36. And I said, man, I feel like 36 just flew by.
Yeah. Yes.
That means 46 is right around the corner and 56 isn't that far away. I'm like, and I could just keep doing this.
Yes. Yes.
And it's helped me I actually brought out the eulogy that I wrote at the men's group a couple months ago when I was at an inflection point. And I was like, I wonder if what I wrote 2 years ago still applies. And I read it. I said, it does.
Right.
I still feel that. I still want that to be my life. And it helped me make a decision in that moment.
Which is awesome, right? Because like that's the thing that when a difficult decision presents itself in this moment, that bigger picture helps to clarify it immediately.
Everything. And things at the lower level, those everyday decisions, or even maybe some of the bigger decisions, you attach yourself to them less.
Yes.
Because you know that there are multiple ways, multiple journeys to get to where you're going at that highest level.
Totally. Totally. And by the way, here's the thing. Like, it doesn't have to be a grandiose eulogy. Like, you don't have to say, My work impacted millions, and I wrote 5 New York Times bestselling books, which I think I have in my eulogy from when I wrote it 2.5 years ago. It could just be, some of the most beautiful eulogies I've read from my clients that I've worked with are so exquisite because of how simple they are. And they focused on their communities that are very close to them, starting with some of their families, but also maybe like the less privileged people in their communities, and just helping them and leaving a lasting legacy of impact behind. So it doesn't have to be that you've accomplished slayed these massive dragons. It could just be something that would give you resonance and peace, and that's something that might live on beyond you, not to satisfy your own ego, but because you left the world better off than when you found it. Like, these are the kinds of things that we want you to be thinking about. And ultimately, it's all about bringing you back to a place of intentionality and not allowing the devil to sneak in and bring you on his ride of drift.
Well, and when I talk to guys about this, the idea of what is my purpose can be scary. So I'm glad you brought up that it doesn't have to be this enormous, grandiose thing. But to hone in, there's one belief that I have. I believe that everybody does have a purpose. And just because the purpose is inside of us doesn't mean we have it. And often we have to give ourselves time to let it come to us, to create this space for it to come to us instead of us trying to go and find it and grab onto it and like, what is my purpose, right?
Yeah.
And there's a book by David Data. It's The Way of the Superior Man.
Yep.
And he talks a lot about how sitting with ourselves and really feeling through what do we actually feel and how that drives some of our behavior. That and action helps us find purpose.
Right on.
And so what I would invite everybody to do is maybe even do that before writing the eulogy.
Right. And you and I had this conversation once too, is to help even illuminate that further faster, is that we have what you and I call the purpose placeholder. If you don't have a consciously identified purpose that like really lights you up, that like kind of aligns all your energies around, there's something that's in its place. And for many of us, it could be money. Right? Money is now taking the place. And like when you do not consciously design your purpose, or like not design it, but like really kind of connect to it, something will take its place. And so you see so many people running around looking for money. People have approval as a purpose. Show me that I'm good enough, that I'm approved, that I'm accepted, that I'm validated. For me, it was for women, right? Like validation from women was my purpose. My whole life was oriented around, can I be attractive to women? I took the jobs that I took because it would make me money and would be, desirable to be a vice president of a large organization, working in a corner office, having an apartment in Manhattan, like with the postal code in New York City. Those were the things like, yes, I liked what I was doing, but it was more to get the attention of women. That was my purpose placeholder because I didn't really ever spend any time doing what you said, which is to kind of sit with it. And when I allowed space and time to just clear some of that clutter, I could then start to feel into that a lot of those conquests were empty for me, and how many years I'd spent, how much time and energy I'd been drifting. And I'm like, that goddamn devil, right? Like it. And once my outside force was thrust upon me to wake me up to another way of being, I since then have been consciously designing my own future, which is why I wrote the book, Design Your Future.
Which is why we're doing this podcast. And I wish this was a message, Don. It's such a powerful message because I wish that at the age of 18, at the age of 15 even, that this was a message that came loud and clear. And these are not the things that we learn in school or even our friends talk about, but how powerful, how much more fun is life when living in this realm of intentionality, of having this purpose. Everything becomes, I shouldn't say everything, but life in general becomes more satisfying, more purpose-driven, and people can feel that.
Yes, it's brighter, it's more vibrant. Like you said before, when a challenge comes your way, it's not, oh shit, let me avoid that. It's like, bring it on. And even in the deepest and darkest of moments, and I've had many of them since I've gone through my awakening and like really understood where drift is in my life, I can always have this deeper sense of knowing that I'm doing it all for something. And I know that. And those nights that I told you about at the beginning of this podcast, that where I woke up afraid, those are gone. They're gone. I don't have those anymore. And that's been gone for 4 or 5 years now. And that is worth the price of admission.
Yeah. Love that.
All right, man. Let's call this one.
Wrap it up.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.